Hi, I'm Andre Collins. Welcome to Pep Talk, the voice of the NFLPA's Professional Athletes Foundation. I'm coming to you from the coziness of my basement here in Arlington, Virginia. But before we get started, let me introduce you to our guests. I have with us today Shanti Das, who is the Executive Director of the foundation Silence the Shame, as well as a music industry veteran. And also with me, my colleague, Caryl Banks, a master's level social worker at the NFLPA, working specifically with the Professional Athletes Foundation. Welcome, ladies.
Hi.
Let me open the conversation really by saying that, stress management is a really important topic for us to try and discuss today, and certainly some of the signs of stress and some of the triggers. For me personally, especially in this time of the coronavirus or COVID-19, and I really feel like I had it a few weeks ago. I mean, I was knocked flat on my back. I'm happy to say that today, after almost about 4 weeks, I'm feeling completely normal and completely fine. But certainly for me during that time and a lot of other times, my stress and my worry kind of manifests, as concerns, you know, concerns for my family, concerns for my friends, what's happening with work, how does, how are the things happening in my life impacting me, on the job, are bills gonna get paid, how many business trips do I have coming up? So it's easy to kind of get lost in the middle of so many of those things. And then for me, being a resource provider, how do I provide for myself? Where do I find the resources and the wherewithal to always be mindful to take care of myself? So, as we get into the conversation, I'm sure I'll have the opportunity to share, how I deal with my own stress and how I relieve stress in my life and try and help my family relieve stress. But for now, I'm going to kick it over to Shanti to start the conversation.
Thank you, Andre. And I'd like to thank Caryl and everyone at the Professional Athletes Foundation for allowing me to moderate this most important conversation. Andre, April is Stress Awareness Month. So I applaud you guys and salute you all for bringing this important information to your community. So let's start off with asking you, how do you manage stress, Andre? I mean, do you have any personal experiences for things that you've dealt with in the past? Is it something you're familiar with? Is it new to you?
I mean, there's always stress. Certainly, having been a former NFL player, certainly, as an athlete, that's a stressful life where you always have to be on, where you're constantly competing, against the guys on the team that have become your friends. So there's all different levels of stress related to that. But for me in my life, yes, of course I have stress. I'm trying to manage my high schoolers, education. I have a 14-year-old son. Any of you out there that have teenage boys, you know how difficult that is to get them to do what they're supposed to do. So for me in my household, that has become my job, trying to communicate with him and manage what he does, but there's stress all around. And I guess, for me, I like to move, I still exercise, I still train. So for me, probably the biggest reliever of stress for me is moving, but I do that in a weird way. I'm not always in the gym, pounding weights. I have a little joke, with Caryl when we're in the weight room or the exercise room together. I'm always like, run, Forrest, run, because I just want to move. And for me, it's not always running. I'm an avid walker. So I think my personal time for stress relief is on the weekends when I can get up early on a Saturday morning. I can put on my workout clothes and I just walk. I hit this beautiful hour and a half long walk through the neighborhood and not looking down at my feet. I always try and look up and look out because there's so much to see. And for me, that really lets the stress kind of fall off my shoulders.
I love that, Andre. You know, Caryl will probably talk more about this, but it's been proven that when we get moving, right, and you start exercising and getting your endorphins going, it's a great way to de-stress and kind of recenter yourself. I personally like to take walks as well, and I have this little old school DVD that I do. It's a hip hop dance routine, so that works for me. So thank you for sharing how you are able to de-stress during these times. Let's go back to something that you mentioned earlier. As a former athlete, can you talk about the stress and pressure that you experience, you know, having to perform every week, right? Whether it's at the collegiate level or the professional level, and how that can sometimes, that stress can weigh down on one's emotional health and wellness.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if it was the same for everyone, but I'm just speaking about my personal experience. You know, when you get to this level, I feel like I felt like there was always something to prove. There's so much judgment in our game, not in a negative way, but, you know, coaches like data, coaches want to evaluate performance. And a lot of times as athletes, you know, there's always a little bit of an artistic thread that runs through us. So when we're on the field of play, you know, we're creating, you know, we're artists. So I didn't always like that aspect of being judged and being critiqued, because when I'm out there on the field, I'm just reacting to what's in front of me. You know, I'm an artist, I'm trying to create something. So I didn't always think that those two things fit well together. So for me, that was a source of stress.
Gotcha. Do you have anything that you can say to any of the athletes out there now in terms of just dealing with the time of being in quarantine and not necessarily even being able to, whether they have jobs now, right, in sports, like what can you lend them from an advice perspective for maintaining right now?
Yeah, I mean, if I can bring it forward a little bit from our playing days, you know, because, you know, these guys, you know, they are working fathers, they're working husbands. You know, they're providing for their families, you know, they're supporting their wives, and, you know, vice versa. Their wives are supporting their husbands, or their significant others are supporting, you know, their partners. Um, you know, my advice is to just kind of be comfortable in this space right now. That's what I've tried to do. Just try and realize that I'm not in control of everything that's happening on the outside of my personal environment. So, you know, some things I have access to, and certainly some things I don't have access to and won't have access to in the near future. So I think the first thing is to just, you know, take a deep breath and realize this new environment that you're working in, and that, you know, it's different, and you can't control what happens on the outside, but you can control how you feel personally about things and how you attack the day.
Absolutely. How have you been able to manage any of the stress, like with your children? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people on the call that are parents. And so being able to manage your personal stressors as well as stressors that may come through being a parent.
I think, you know, being a parent and being a husband, luckily for me, you know, we like each other. I think my wife likes me, and I think, you know, we both like our kids. So for us, you know, it's not a horrible situation. But again, you know, having teenagers, you know, in the house and trying to, you know, manage their expectations around staying in, you know, it's very difficult. This is the time in their lives when they're very social. You know, their outreach to their friends is, you know, is running on high, you know, all the time. And, you know, going to a high school that has a fun aspect to the community of what they do in that school, taking that away from the kids has been tough. But I think what we try and have a regular day. You know, I kind of head to the basement. My wife kind of has her space upstairs where we have to get some work done. I think for my son, it's kind of worked best to allow him to sleep in a little bit, because it kind of shortens the daylight for him. And I feel like he manages that a little bit better. So we let him sleep a little bit, then we get him up, and then he starts his day. My daughter's generally, you know, up early, moving about. But I think, you know, consistently trying to have some family time at the end of the day, and really trying to separate the work that we all have to do with, you know, having some semblance of a normal life has been helpful, and we try and do that, you know, around dinner or preparing dinner. And at that point, we try and kind of close the computers down, you know, leave the phone, you know, down in the basement, and try and separate the day as much as we can.
What can you say to our viewers about the stress that we may be experiencing from the media consumption? As we know, with the 24-hour news cycle, it's a lot to process, and we're still in this quarantine. So any advice on kind of managing whether you're watching the news cycle or constantly, you know, looking at social media? Because, you know, we have heard a lot of how like social media and too much news consumption can lead to a very stressful day as well.
Yeah, I can't say that I've been great in this aspect, because I've been watching the news 24 hours a day. And anyone at the NFLPA knows that back in February, I was running through the hallway saying, hey, this thing's coming, this thing's coming. So I'm probably not the best person to answer this question, but I have watched the news, and I've gotten trouble with my wife for always being tuned in. So lately I've tried to minimize it a little bit. I do try and start the morning with it, check in around dinner time a little bit, and then, you know, before I go to bed at night. There's so much out there to consume, but you don't want to completely, you know, shut it down. There's some really good information out there, and I think sometimes if you completely disconnect, you can get a false sense of security. But, you know, I think that's an individual decision. You know, if you're a news watcher and you can handle, you know, a lot of consumption, and that makes you feel comfortable. Because for me, I feel like that's a little bit of a stress reliever, but for my wife, it's a stressor. So I think it's up to the individual.
I agree. For me, Andre, it definitely is a bit of a stressor for me. I try to limit my consumption. I was reading some information that the American Psychiatric Association Foundation sent out, and they said to, you know, limit the media consumption if it is a stressor for you. You know, avoid the continuous exposure. And because some of this may trigger anxiety and stress or even panic attacks. So you want to stay informed. Like for me, I kind of set my schedule on my phone. So I try to get up in the morning and watch, you know, the news around 7 a.m. and I check back in the middle of the day, and then maybe watch the national news. But to your point, you have to do what works best for you. But it is important to recognize, I think, those feelings within yourself. And if you find yourself getting stressed out, you know, to maybe get up and take a walk or stretch or kind of engage maybe in some meditation or something that can bring those stress levels down.
But, you know, what about the guys? You know, I feel like I'm in tune. I hear a lot of this, certainly because, you know, I work with 2 social workers at the NFLPA. I'm constantly engaged. But what about the guys out there that don't have access to that, you know, all the time, you know, and maybe some of them, you know, might be struggling a little bit more than I feel like I am currently.
Caryl, do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, everybody is different in how they consume and what they want to consume. I always say, if you start to see, and we'll get into later, what are some warning signs for stress? What do the symptoms and signs look like? But if you start seeing and feeling different reactions while you're watching it, or if you're watching it late at night and then you find it very difficult to go to sleep, monitor what time of day, monitor how much you consume, and just realize, you know, or take a day off, or say, you know what, I'm going to watch 20 minutes, because you kind of get the same news cycle over and over and it repeats. So watch 20 minutes and then commit to cutting it off. Make a schedule for yourself. And if you want to allow yourself that time, but you also have to set boundaries so that you can protect yourself and your mental health and your overall just emotional well-being.
So very true. Thank you, Caryl. So Andre, I'd like to know, have you ever engaged in yoga or, you know, meditation? Have you ever tried that before? I know it works for some, it doesn't work for others, but.
I've dabbled in the yoga, and I have my very own beginning yoga routine, and I was doing it on Saturday, and my daughter looked at me and she said, what are you doing? But I think, you know, some of those stretches and some of those poses, you know, certainly it's you know, it's hard, and it's a physical exercise, but I feel like it does relax me. So I do dabble in some beginning yoga. I'm not twisting myself up like a pretzel or anything like that, but I do know some basic poses, and I will engage for 30 minutes. And for me, that is very relaxing.
Anything else that you do? I know a lot of people have been logging on to some of our popular DJs' Instagram accounts and going to like virtual parties, or last night, pop culture producers Babyface and Teddy Riley had their second, match off, if you will. So any of that kind of stuff has been helpful for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Instagram and YouTube are nice breathers. My wife and I, we're avid television watchers. Like, we watch every reality show that has ever existed. So for us, that's a way to decompress at night and kind of watch a little bit of mindless television. So we still have the opportunity to do that together. So for me, again, that's a big stress reliever in my life. It was before, this stay-at-home order, and it has continued through the stay-at-home order. So, just little tips like that. And I always encourage everyone to just try and focus on yourself. What do you like? Focus on some things that you like and try and incorporate that into some type of stress reliever. um, Instagram, it's nice. I check in and I have a little fun on there, but I don't stay on there long. YouTube, you can always Google, something funny, or search something funny on YouTube and catch a few laughs. I do that every once in a while to kind of break up, things if they're getting a little monotonous. So
Yeah.
there's lots of opportunity out there.
Same thing for me. I will say, the first match that Babyface and Teddy Riley didn't come off quite as, I think, how they wanted it to. And the internet, they created some pretty funny memes, and laughter is really great for the soul. And I don't think I've laughed that hard in quite some time. So it was a nice way for me to kind of break up the stress of the day. I want to switch a little bit and shine a light on some of the positives that may have been coming out, or might be coming rather, out of this situation. I've been talking recently to a lot of celebrities and athletes on my IG Live, and so many of them have said, like, they were surprised at how they are really kind of re-getting to know themselves, and a lot of like things that they're planning in terms of their future. They've been able to really spend time and map out some strategic goals in a positive way. So can you talk about some of the unexpected positives that have come with this new normal, or this now normal, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, there's always some unintended positive consequences to a situation like this. I think for me, it's having the opportunity to be home all day with my wife and kids. And like I said, we like each other, so it's fun. But that, and then, there's always a few things around the house to do that maybe you don't really notice in the course of a normal work week. So for me, it's been kind of trying to make a list and think about, the things that I can try and accomplish, over the next few months. Certainly a part of that is, making sure, that my work, that my job, my career, that work gets done. But you also have time, around the house to look at some other things and do some other things. What has that consisted of for me? I mean, I wanted a better lawn this year. So, at the first spotting of, those dandelions coming up, I went out there and I picked every one of them so that they wouldn't spread all across my lawn. And my lawns look pretty good over the last couple of weeks. But it's just silly things like that. But really more long term, I think for me, I just wanted to try and, use this time to pause. I have a pretty busy job. My son and my daughter are involved in athletics. I have a senior in college, as well. So for me, this pause has been good, and I just wanted to use this time mostly to try and reset. Part of my resolution for the year was, to look up and to look out, and really that a part of that is just trying to, reconnect with myself, reconnect with the things around me. So I'm really looking at this time not as completing a project per se, but turning inward a little bit and making sure that I'm grounded, that I'm focused, that that I have a clear vision, for the next few years. So I'm going to use my time to focus on that mainly.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. And for me, I've been able to just try to set some more realistic goals for myself, both short term and long term. And what I've been telling a lot of people is manage those goals and expectations too, because it's, you don't have to start a new company and, build a new side hustle, but really utilize some of this time for yourself and try to do 2 to 3 realistic goals a week so that by the end of the week, there is that feeling of accomplishment, right? And that takes some of the stress and pressure off of what we feel like we're supposed to be doing during this time. But, certainly it allows you a chance to look and reflect inward and project some positive goals for your family. I want to turn a little bit and go back to speaking from a perspective of an athlete. How can a teammate or a family member help a friend or a fellow colleague get help if they feel like the stress is kind of leading them down a pathway that is truly affecting their emotional health and wellness?
Caryl, you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think when we talk about some of the coping skills and the toolkit we put together for you, I think one of the biggest things is staying connected and connecting with others. So it's reaching out. And like Shanti was saying, if you set a few goals for yourself each week, maybe one of your goals is looking for who you're going to reach out to, and how to do acts of kindness. So they can be small things, sending a text, pick 5 people and just send a quick text or pick up the phone and call them, whoever comes to mind, and just reach out. Or if you are following them on Instagram or Twitter, any social media channel, and they're maybe home alone, they don't have kids or a partner, just calling and checking in with them to see how they're doing, because it goes so far just when you call and say, or text and say, hey, are you good? How are you doing? How's your day today? And it gives them the opportunity to then answer and leave that open-ended for them.
Thank you. So Caryl, I have another question for you. With April being Stress Awareness Month, what are some of the signs and symptoms that we can look out for?
Okay.
If we feel like someone is really stressed out?
Great question. So when it comes to stress, you think of it in 2 categories. So most of the time when you see folks talk about it and what the effects are, you're going to think of physical symptoms, and you're also going to think of emotional symptoms. Now, I always say everyone is different. How people manage their stress, cope with stress, we try to put preventative tools in place, but you need to be aware of yourself and know when you need to implement those coping skills. So some of the physical symptoms, you might feel nauseous, feeling faint or sweaty, headaches and migraines, indigestion, skin irritations, some minor illnesses, and then that just feeling tired, that fatigued, and I'll say this, right now, being home all the time, it's easy to get into that fatigue because we're off schedule, we're off routine, we're not getting up, we're not going. So I encourage you to think about that if you are experiencing it, to still go to bed at a normal bedtime, set your alarm and get up and kind of have your day. But you may see other physical symptoms. So you just pay attention to something that is different from your normal daily operating. Then from an emotional side, there just may be increased forgetfulness, difficulty making decisions, losing your sense of humor, just not really being able to laugh much, irritability or moodiness when you typically wouldn't have that involved, negative thinking or negative self-talk, especially, and to go back to you, at both Andre and Shanti, with goal setting, because I think so many people are doing that right now. Make manageable goals, because don't get into the negative self-talk like, oh man, I didn't get this done today, I didn't finish reading this book, or I didn't finish writing this book, or some big goal. So the negative thinking can really impact you. Poor concentration, and just then that state of worry, which I know Right now, a lot of us have, in general, with COVID, a lot of us can't see our family members, or we can't see our children that are off at college or off on their own with their own families. For me personally, my son's a Marine and he's on base, and man, it's been hard not to be able to go see him. But it's just doing what I can. So FaceTiming, sending him packages, checking in, and doing those pieces. So again, I can't emphasize enough that it is different for everyone. You have to know yourself and how you typically react to situations. If you start reacting differently and they're in a negative manner, make a mental note of that and think about how that may apply to what's going on right now for you.
All great information, Caryl. I'd also like to ask you, what can you say to anyone that actually may be in isolation, where they may not be married, they may not have kids with them? Certainly for myself, it's been difficult at times being quarantined by myself, and I think the isolation stresses me out a lot at times. Do you have anything that you can recommend if people are by themselves during this quarantine and are feeling stressed?
Sure. So when you're going solo, and I'm with you, Shanti, I'm, here, and it's me and Sparky. Hopefully he won't bark. One of the things.
At least you have a dog. That's great.
So there's a couple of things. Again, I go back to connecting with others, but one of the things I put on my goal sheet is cooking dinner at least 2 to 3 times of the week in the evening, teaching myself new recipes, getting on whatever channels. There's so many people that do different cooking shows, eating healthier foods, reaching out to friends as well, and finding stuff that makes you laugh and brings you joy, and that grounds you. So, you may have to go back to, again, just the FaceTime or the Zoom calls. I've seen a lot of people connecting with their old high school classmates that they grew up with on Zoom or another platform, just to have those conversations. But it's about that self-care, doing things that are kind for yourself, but also realizing whether you're alone or with your family, also cut yourself some slack in this moment. Yeah. This is a tough time. So to expect that you're just going to handle it flawlessly is not realistic. So work to cut yourself some slack, take some deep breaths. And Shanti, have you looked at anything? Is there any tools that you do for yourself when you start to feel that anxiety and panic home by yourself?
Well, certainly one thing that I love, Caryl and Andre, is it's a yoga technique. It's a breathing technique called the 4-4-8 technique, and you can Google it. So you can inhale for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4, and then you do a really strong, long exhale for 8 seconds. And I try to do like 10 reps of that. And I really find that it recenters myself, or recenters me rather. And, I do it with my eyes closed, and I try to just not think about anything. And it actually has worked for me here, as well as some of the times in the past that I felt like a panic attack was coming on. So really, I would encourage everyone to just Google and read and learn more about just simple breathing and how it can really bring you back to a place of calm and peace. The other thing that I do, Caryl, being by myself, is I try to change up the scenery. So I'll utilize a different room in my home that I have not been in a while, and just kind of sit there, or I might use time to rearrange things in my kitchen so that things feel new and fresh, and I feel like it's something positive and I'm seeing something different even though I'm in my home. And lastly, it's reconnecting with people that I don't normally talk to on a regular basis, because I think we've all been inside for quite some time now. And so even all of these wonderful tips, you have to break up the monotony a little bit. It gets to be like, okay, it's the same routine every day. I'm going to get up, I'm going to work out, I'm going to do a happy hour, via Zoom. And how many of those can you really do? So try to incorporate conversations with people, whether it's family members, old teammates, your old coach, just reach out and see how folks are doing, because you don't know how that one phone call or that one text will brighten someone's day. My old boss, who's 80 years old, but he gave me my first job in the music industry, we reconnected, and it made his world. And I know he's really scared and afraid. And so let's try to think about other ways that we can do from a connectivity perspective that allows us to talk to people that we wouldn't normally talk to in these critical times, because I think that can certainly go a long way.
Yes.
Certainly connecting is extremely important. But Shanti and Caryl, let me go back for a second to stressful situations. You know, I think one of the techniques that I've used, and you both can weigh in on this, is, you know, whenever I've been in an extremely stressful situation, I don't even know where I learned this, maybe from a very wise person along the way. But I always try and stop and figure out why I'm feeling this way. And almost always I can identify all the things I was thinking about. Most of those things are not adding to the stress. It's usually one thing that I can identify that's making me feel or think that way. And when I zero in on it or focus in on it, it's really not that big of a thing. And for me, that has always helped kind of bring me back to reality a little bit and say, you know what, you know, in life, there's always, you know, some of these moments, and, you know, you've got to work through it. But I've always tried to stop myself and try and ask myself, why am I feeling this way? And trying to narrow it down to that one thing that's making me think or feel the way that I'm feeling in that moment. Is that a clinical strategy, or is this just something that works for me? Or
No, and that's excellent. A lot of people, one of the pieces in the toolkit that everyone will have access to with the link is, and I kind of phrased it as acknowledging hard times. So kind of stopping and acknowledging those emotions. And then whether it's just kind of talking yourself through it through self-talk, or some people like to journal and write it out, or if they figure out, okay, here's what's going on, here's why I'm feeling this way, and then assess, okay, is there a reasonably good solution to this? You know, what can I come to resolve this? How can I make a concrete plan? You know, and then don't get discouraged if the first solution you try doesn't pan out. Just try another one. So Andre, I'm sure, and maybe you can speak to, you know, you might identify it and then the next day or an hour later kind of get back into that same feeling or mindset, and just not allowing that to discourage you from continuing to work on it.
yeah, and I see Harry Swain on the chat, and he's saying, hey, you know, journaling, yes, exclamation point. And you know, and I'm in your office a lot, so Caryl, I know you journal. You know, I journal in the morning and I pray in the morning to start every day at work. And you know, we don't want to forget about those methods either.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just to Harry and to all the other participants, there's some really great gratitude journals out there. So if you feel like, okay, I can't sit down with a blank piece of paper and just write, there's a lot of gratitude journals that are out there and on Amazon, and those that give you prompts, and they call it the 5-minute gratitude in the morning, or you can do the evening, whatever time of day. But you definitely have a lot of options with journaling.
And I was just going to say, you know, being a woman of faith, and not to impose, you know, my faith beliefs on anyone, but, you know, I grew up a Christian, and, you know, I really, in the mornings, you know, I turn to God and I just try to center myself. And, you know, there's a really great app, Bible.com, or you can visit it online, Bible.com, or the app. And I've just started this new plan called Victory Over Anxiety. So it's been really great for me to read through that and kind of process some things and try not to like worry about the future, because I think we all have enough going on in our present day. So whether that is, you know, through whether you believe in the universe, or you believe in God, or you want to journal and get it out, you need to be able to process through it. I think that's the most important thing, and find ways that speak to your heart and to your soul. That allow you to really kind of recenter and lead the best productive day, you know, possible. I would like to also go back to Caryl to ask you, what are some resources that you recommend? I just mentioned and some apps. Also, even Calm is really great. I think Simple Habit. I don't know if you guys have a partnership with a specific meditation app, but can you share some really great resources with us?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of resources on the internet, and I know there's some. We see your questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to look at those and kind of tie them in to Shanti's question. So just kind of asking how you call on your support system when they're having challenges. You know, we are in a challenging space, so I think it's acknowledging that we are both feeling similar, and how can we support each other. So giving that mutual support, maybe being accountability partners, because, you know, for example, exercise is going to make you feel better. So you commit to getting in so many steps, and Andre can attest, he gets his steps in even more and more on travel. He's in the hotel room watching TV, doing laps in his room. So get creative. Yeah, get creative. So maybe offer to be an accountability partner with them, or just a check-in partner, or let's check in every day, because you're right, it is hard to call on your support system when they're also equally having those challenges. And then another question, and Andre and Shanti, you can chime in, is any tips on how to say no to family or work during stressful times?
Well, I'll just lead off with one thing and I'll kick it right over to Andre. One thing that I'm proud of now is I believe that no is a complete sentence. So it took me a long time to get there, because I would yes, everybody. And it got to a point where I couldn't handle all the pressure anymore of telling everyone yes all the time.
Yeah, I'm not a no person, and I've struggled with this, you know, for my entire life. You know, I've gotten better at it. I typically don't say no to my wife. I'm good at saying no to my kids. But, you know, again, you know, there's only so many hours in the day. And I guess it's, you know, it's whatever you can handle and whatever you can take. But let me go in a little bit of a different direction. You know, like what if I'm drinking to relieve my stress, you know, because, you know, so many Americans, you know, do have a drink after work. But when you're working from home, you know, what happens if you start, you know, taking that drink at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock to try and relieve the stress? You know, where does that go? Or do we have any advice, advice there? Because it's easy to fall into that trap.
Absolutely, it is. And it's one of the things that I just want to make sure people understand. Stress can lead us to, you know, having some mild depressive feelings, having some generalized anxiety, and alcohol acts as a depressant. So I need you in some moments to remind yourself, in the end, it's not going to be a helpful tool. If you're having a glass of wine at dinner, great. If you find you've been drinking Monday through Friday and you're like, I need to reel this in, or someone has said reel it in, then, you know, set boundaries. Again, it's not saying never no and, you know, don't do it at all, but setting boundaries for yourself, such as, okay, Wednesday nights when I watch X, Y, and Z reality show, I want to have my cocktail or my glass of wine with it. And then on Saturday night, when me and my partner have figured out in-home date nights, that's going to be the other night I drink. Yeah. And then having those other days that you open up to leave free from the alcohol.
I think that's really important, and we're going to open up for Q&A shortly. I know there's several questions already in that we're going to read. But for me, in 2015, I went through a severe depression and even suicidal ideation. I talk a lot about it in the work that I do with Silence to Shame. And I got to tell you, Caryl, alcohol was not my friend. You know, I was the person that would, you know, maybe have a glass of wine or a cocktail with a dinner, but then the one drink would turn into two turns into three. And when it's a party of one, you know, there's definitely an area to be concerned with. And so I found myself slowly weaning off of alcohol because it is a natural depressant. So I think the advice that you just gave is excellent. You need to really be mindful of that and decide how you're going to, you know, incorporate that into your lifestyle from a healthy perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I see in the chat that one of the players is asking a fantastic question about, you know, what if you're in denial of your anxiety or your depression, you know? And I guess, you know, really that manifests as kind of getting wound up a bit. But what if you're in denial? What does that person do?
A couple of things. First, if you yourself are recognizing you're in denial, to me, you're actually recognizing it. So Frederick, I'm not sure if it's related to the person, or if someone else is having the depressive feelings and anxiety and they continue to just deny the feelings and the thoughts. I think a lot of times we just want to suppress what we feel, because if we don't think about it or acknowledge it, it'll go away. And it won't. So what I would say, whether it's you or a loved one or a friend, incorporating some of the things and the strategies we gave you with the exercise and movement, staying positive, nutrition, I have a group of friends on Thursday. We decide what we're going to cook, a healthy meal. We hop on, we're all in our kitchens and we cook. So engage them in those things and slowly just continue to talk to them about it. Saying to them, hey, I'm concerned. You just seem not yourself lately, or you seem to be worrying about things that you normally wouldn't. And try to open up that dialogue and see where you can go from there. But it's just continuing to have that support. And if it's for yourself, again, I encourage you to set a timer for 10, 20 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with, getting your journal and just writing. Don't put a lot of thought into it. Just write feelings, thoughts, all of anything that comes up, and see what comes out of that.
Let me pull a sentence out of there, because you said something really big in there. You said, you ask them or say to them, you seem to be worried about something that you normally wouldn't. I think that's a nice compassionate way to approach the topic with someone.
Yeah. And just, also remembering that denial, it during these times or during really stressful moments in your life outside of, COVID and the quarantine that we're dealing with, denial is a normal feeling when coping with difficult circumstances, and insight is the first step. So when you have insight, whether it's for feeling anxious, feeling depressed, feeling stressed, you can use some of these words sort of interchangeably, but they do mean different things. Insight. And Shanti, earlier you said, going back to the alcohol, you realized in one day had insight and perspective, this isn't serving me. Mm-hmm. And I need to make a change. That change doesn't happen overnight, but once you can have that insight into it, then you're more likely to start taking those steps, the small steps, to make the change.
Absolutely. One thing that brings on stress certainly is grief. We've lost, a lot of families have lost people during COVID-19, and just in general, this past weekend was the 1-year anniversary of the passing of my sister, which was a devastating loss for myself and my family. And having that insight, to your point, Caryl, I made sure that I stayed away from a lot of the social drinking this weekend, mm-hmm. because I knew that would send me down a rabbit hole that wasn't going to be healthy. And so I wanted to really focus more on the positive, mm-hmm. of celebrating the life of my loved one instead of just really being down on myself. And I knew that alcohol would be that downer. So yes. Yeah. Now I do have that insight, and I'm able to recognize it as a trigger. So we probably have about 15 minutes left. I want to get into some of the questions through the Q&A. I'm going to pop up this little Q&A bubble here. Mm-hmm. Finances are stressful in general. I'm trying to make sure I can pay my bills. What should I do if I feel overwhelmed and think I cannot pay them?
Well, I can start with saying, right now there's a different level of financial stress. So being overwhelmed by it is completely normal. But just in life in general, working with the systems that are in place for you, whether it's some of the programs that we have through the NFLPA and PAF, with Financial Finesse, Money Management International, to help with budgets, to help looking at how to best manage what is going on for your particular situation. In the moment right now with COVID, we're really trying to educate ourselves on the resources federally and statewide, but I encourage you, reach out to your mortgage lenders, your car lenders, your car insurance lenders. They are wanting to help people. They are wanting to give back. I've experienced it personally. I've had a number of players who have called and we've had discussions on resources, and they've successfully, been able to work with the lenders on getting payments deferred, and then having a good plan to be able to manage it coming back through. So I don't know, Andre, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to that. And I'd say, those are very difficult situations, those financial situations, and don't let yourself get paralyzed. It's not a time to just sit and not take action. There's a lot of things you can do to alleviate pressure in those situations, but sitting still, and we've watched so many of our players and family and friends do this. You just sit still and don't do nothing, and then in the 11th hour you try and make an incredible save. But that's the wrong approach. Don't sit still, get active in that process and get on that phone and start to reach out to people and try and come up with a solution. There are solutions out there.
Yep, we put in the link just for everyone, the resource for Money Management International. So please look out or reach out to our office. To Andre's point, if you don't know what that first step is, if you're feeling stuck, give us a call. We'll talk you through it. We're here.
And Google to see what resources are out there, because even for me, with Silence to Shame being a small foundation or organization, there are other companies that are offering grants, right? And so in addition to us applying for the PPP loan, we have reached out to other organizations and did ample applications in terms of just trying to really get some extra income in for the organization. So make sure that you're Googling and doing as much research as you can, because there's so many people out there that are willing to help, that actually have money to support us during these times. All right, let's go to our next question. Do you have any tips about how to say no to family or work during stressful times?
Well, I mean, I can take the first part of that. For us former players, we know that, and I'm just going to keep it real right now. We know that for so many former players, they kind of become a source of support financially for family members. And, I always try and advise players to get out of this sort of relationship as quickly as you can. Your family was able to take care of themselves most times before you were a player, and they can take care of themselves after you're no longer a player. So you can put yourself in a very difficult financial crisis if you're trying to support more than one household. So saying no to family is a very difficult thing, especially saying no to mom is a very difficult thing. But somewhere inside, you've got to find the strength to do that and ask them to stand on their own 2 feet at some point. And we can get on the phone and we can talk about some of the things that have worked over the years. And personally, I've gone through it. So many players have gone through it, and we have that documented. But you just can't say no without offering up a strategy. So certainly thinking your way through a strategy that goes through saying no to family, especially around money, is going to be very important. Anyone else have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's great, Andre. And what Shanti said earlier about just, no is a sentence in of itself, and working to learn how to be okay with that.
And then providing, I think, the family resources, right? Whether it's money management tools as well. I think oftentimes, in a lot of our communities, we're just not taught about financial responsibility as probably we should be. So what you're learning, pass that on to your aunties and your cousins and even the younger generations, and maybe have a virtual Sunday dinner, and use that time to talk about things that matter within your families. And even if it's the village, I think you guys have to talk about it as opposed to just kind of saying no, because that hard cutoff can be tough sometimes for family members. But when you provide those resources and you guys are learning and growing together, then at least you're offering additional solutions.
Yeah, and if they're asking you about money, I think it's fair to ask them about money and how much money they're bringing in every month. And you might find out that they're doing just fine. And as long as they can keep getting a little from you, they're doing that much better. So, I think it's fair to say to them, well, how much money are you making? I know you go to work every day. So, you know, you can kind of turn that conversation or turn that light back on them a little bit to kind of understand what their true picture is.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take another question here. Can you provide action steps for people who are too embarrassed to see a therapist, but know it's something they really should do?
Sure. So, one of the things, there is a stigma for a long time around going to therapy and seeing a therapist. First and foremost, what you need to know is that it is confidential. You can do it on your own without anyone knowing. Even with everything that's going on, there's telehealth options. We have resources for our former players and their families through Cigna Behavioral Support so that you can go see a therapist. But it's also just calling and let's talk about where the embarrassment stems from, and navigate through that space to get you to a place to feel comfortable to go and taking that first step, and just working through it. So I just encourage you to call and talk to myself or Andre or Tyrone in the office, and let us help you figure out how you take that initial step.
And I would just like to add, one of the main reasons that my organization, Silence to Shame, exists is to help erase stigma around mental health. So we really have a lot of helpful videos that are up on our YouTube page under Silence to Shame, where we interview celebrities and influencers and everyday people that talk about them overcoming that stigma. One of the main interviews that I recall is singer-songwriter Caryl Hilson. And she had been going through a severe depression for 7 years, and she spoke publicly about it for the first time on one of our panels. And I was just so humbled that she felt that it was a safe enough space to open up. So I think if you can try to look at as many, again, videos and scroll through people's timelines on social media that might be talking about mental health, maybe even follow the hashtag mental health or behavioral health, and you'll see that a lot more people are opening up and not being so embarrassed about going to therapy. And the other thing about therapy to remember is if you happen to see a therapist and it's not a good situation for you, or you don't feel like you're connecting, don't give up on it. Because we've heard people that say, oh, I tried it, it didn't work. And then they just go back to being either, depressed or going through, anxiety and other mental health challenges. Therapy, is like anything else. You go to that one restaurant, it's not that great. Doesn't mean you're going to stop eating out. You keep going until you find the right one that works for you. Even I tell people sometimes it's like being on Tinder. You gotta keep swiping. You may have to go to 2 or 3 therapists until you find the right one.
Yeah.
And even, sometimes some people like to find a therapist, that can relate to them culturally. A lot of therapists are trained around cultural competency, but sometimes, finding a therapist that look like you, may be good for you. So you can go on like psychologytoday.com or NAMI.org. Those are all really great resources in terms of finding a therapist in your area.
Yeah. And, just to go back and reference, having the insight to know that that is something you desire to have in your life, and having the insight to know that you just feel embarrassed about it is actually a first action step. So now it's just about looking at what is that next step and what that looks like for you. But great question. And we're here to help to get you connected.
We also have another question, and we're about 6 minutes out from 2 o'clock. I am scared about things. How do I manage my fears?
That's a big question. Having fear, I think it's maybe sitting down, and again, I go back to utilizing your resources, whether it's talking to friends and family, whether it's journaling, or whether it's seeking professional help. I don't know how severe the fears are, if it's always something that's existed, if it's creating anxiety, if it's creating things that are having a negative impact on your day-to-day living, then I would definitely recommend seeking professional help through a counselor in some capacity, so that you can talk through those things and identify and then figure out which coping skills are going to work best for you. Because it is a big thing, and a lot of people are scared right now. Mm-hmm. And you still can do counseling and sign up for counseling and have it from the comfort of your home. I know right now people don't want to go out and go to offices. A lot of offices aren't open. So there is the ability to stay home and still do it confidentially through a platform similar to this.
And there's another great organization that we've worked with and so many other mental health organizations utilize. And I'm sure you're familiar with them, Caryl. It's the Crisis Text Line organization. Mm-hmm. And they have crisis counselors that are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's free, it's confidential. It doesn't replace therapy, but it's really good in terms of de-escalating situations or if you feel like you're in a crisis. So you can text the word silence to 741-741 and be immediately connected with a counselor, and they will, talk and text with you from about 15 to 30 minutes, and then they can refer you to a therapist in your area. So that's another great resource.
And is that a resource that you can use multiple times at no cost?
Correct.
Good to know.
Absolutely.
And then well, we're just going to say real quick to Ron, food too. Yes. And I had a note here to myself to talk really quickly about emotional eating. So there's a difference. And right now we're home. So we're snacking all day. I think we're eating more than we normally would. So when you're going to go get something to eat, when you're starting off to go open the fridge, the question is, okay, am I eating in response to my feelings or am I having physical hunger? Ask yourself, when did I eat last? How many hours has it been? And look at those little steps. If you just ate an hour ago, chances are it's something emotional, whether or boredom or whatever it may be. So try to set it up or set a schedule for yourself to help with that emotional eating and that food aspect as well.
Great point, Caryl. Thank you for that. I found myself feeling like that the other day, and I said, you know what, Chips, I don't need you. I'm just doing it because I'm having a moment, but I tried to do something else healthy. I got out and took a walk. So one last question here, guys. Would you agree to have your wife and kids join webinars that are available for us? That's a great question.
Wives, definitely, yes. And your children, depending upon the topic, if you feel it's something that's good for them, you're their parent, and that would be something that, would be from your best judgment. But we definitely would love to have the families here with us. Andre, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you have to judge whether sometimes the content is mature. So you have to judge just whether or not your child is adult enough to handle the content. But at the Professional Athletes Foundation, we understand that our community extends beyond just our players. It extends to the spouses, it extends to the significant others, it extends to the parents of the players, the children of the players, friends of the players, and other leaders in the community that are connected to our players. So we know that our community is wide, and everyone is always welcome.
One thing I would add that I think it's important, if you do have younger children, and Caryl, you can maybe speak to this quickly, I think it's important to either talk to a family therapist, even your primary healthcare physician, or one of the resources that you have at the Professional Athletes Foundation to learn how to talk to children and young kids, because stress and anxiety and depression, they manifest themselves differently with children, and they don't understand some of the bigger terminology. So if your child says that they have a tummy ache or a headache that they can't get rid of, that could very well be stress. And so I think it's important to learn about emotional health and wellness for kids and adolescents so that you can learn how to process that properly with your children.
Absolutely. And everything in the toolkit for stress can be applied to teens and children. So it's all of the same things: acknowledging their feelings, letting them have an outlet, giving them the space to, be upset, especially, if you have a senior that was supposed to graduate, or you have a first grader that's missing their friends, or they've had to celebrate birthdays with just the small immediate family, and that's not what you typically do. I think it's just finding the joy in the moments, but also acknowledging their feelings and letting them have that space.
Absolutely. And our last question is, what is Silence to Shame? So I'll close out quickly and kick it back to Andre. Silence to Shame is a foundation that I created 4 years ago to erase stigma around emotional health and wellness. My dad took his own life when I was 7 months old. My best friend took her own life in 2014, and in 2015, I came really close to taking my own life. But through the help of clinicians and my pastor, and so faith and therapy for me was what kind of turned my life around, and I'm very passionate and committed to this work. And so you can visit our website at silencetheshame.com. We have resources on there and a lot of helpful information. We're excited that we are the 2020 charitable partner for the NFL Players Association around emotional health and wellness. So hopefully you'll be seeing more of us. And we do have over 40 podcasts available on Google Play, iTunes, and SoundCloud that has some amazing content that I think might be helpful. And we also post a lot of stuff on social media. So at Silence the Shame on Instagram and at Silence TH Shame on Facebook and Twitter. I am just so grateful to have been able to join you, Andre and Caryl, in this most important conversation. Thank you for what you guys are doing for your athletes in the community. And we certainly look forward to collaborating more in the future with the Professional Athletes Foundation.
Great, and thank you so much, Shanti and Caryl, for your time today. And let me just close out by saying, you can visit the Professional Athletes Foundation at yourpaf.com. That's just YOUR, P as in Paul, A as in Apple, F as in Frank, .com. Just my closing statement is, hey, bad things are going to happen to us in our lives. Tough times are going to come our way in our lives. And, I always like to say, you just can't pack everything away in your suitcase of life. Get some help, try and, let some of that roll off your shoulders. If you can't do it with your own coping mechanisms, certainly seek some help. For our players and our community of players, the Professional Athletes Foundation is always here to assist. So for this version of Pep Talk, I'm signing off from my basement. We'll see you next time. Thanks.